Hello, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on Thursday, June 13th, 2024. Got two different stories I want to talk about today, and one of them being Russia and its horizontal escalation, and the other being the recent expiration of the petrodollar deal with Saudi Arabia, a hugely important story that little talk is being given to, of course, on the American lamestream propaganda media. But let's start with Russia. Don't forget, tomorrow night, folks, we do have a 5 o'clock in the afternoon vid chat, Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock. That will be our late vid chat for this month. So please get your questions and comments in no later than 10 p.m. tonight, U.S. Central Time, so I can get those printed out and organize my response. Anyway, don't forget, tomorrow afternoon, 5 o'clock, U.S. Central Time. Now, let's go to Russia. There is an article in RT, again, highlighting Mr. Dmitri Medvedev's remarks. You recall at one time he was the president of the Russian Federation. Right now, he is the deputy in charge of Russia's National Security Council. And he's, of course, been ratcheting up the rhetoric. But there is an interesting twist in that rhetoric lately. And I want you to listen to this article. And again, the rhetoric itself is fairly consistent with what he said before, and we're going to get into this aspect of it in the second story. But first, let's look at the odd thing that he just recently said. According to the article, quote, every weakness of the United States and its allies should be exploited to undermine them and obstruct life for their citizens, the Russian official said on Thursday, reacting to the latest round of sanctions announced by Washington earlier this week. Now, this is the first time, as I am able to recall, that any Russian leader has now specifically mentioned the citizens of the West as being targets of any Russian operation. And now we're quoting Mr. Medvedev directly, quote, are they afraid that we would transfer our arms to the enemies of the Western world? We should send every kind of weapon except nuclear for now, unquote, Medvedev wrote on social media. Quote, are they afraid of anarchy and crime waves in large cities? We should help disrupt their municipal authorities, unquote. So in other words, the clarification now, if you're reading between the lines, and I think this is hugely significant, the clarification is not just any citizens. He's talking about citizens in America's large cities, or to be blunt, he's talking about targeting the blue targets in the American political landscape. And incidentally, folks, go back and do a little research into the colors that were chosen to represent the political parties in the 1980s. They are exactly the opposite of what they are now, and I think that's a huge part of the story. To continue with the Russia Today article, quote, Russia could trigger a war in space, wage a psychological warfare campaign against Western citizens so that they, now listen to this is Medvedev, so that they, quote, tremble under blankets in their cozy homes, unquote, and unleash a tsunami of fake news, quote, to turn their life into a never-ending nightmare in which they cannot distinguish reality from the wildest fiction, unquote. Moscow should, quote, obliterate their energy infrastructure, industry, transport, banking, and social services, instill fear over an imminent collapse of all critical infrastructure, unquote, according to Medvedev. So in other words, what I'm suggesting in this article is, again, they are telling us, they are signaling, they are messaging all the options of horizontal escalation that they've been hinting that they would start to use if the West persisted in this insane war in the Ukraine. This is exactly what's going on. But I do think if you read between the lines now, it is significant that we are now hearing about direct operation against the citizenry of the countries of the West, and in particular, Mr. Medvedev is pointing out the large cities, the Parises, Berlins, Londons, New York cities, Swampington, D.C., Chicago, and so on. This is a huge, huge, and I think telltale clue that, again, the Russians realize that their problem isn't with the citizenry of the West, it's with the West's leadership. So this is going to be very interesting, and he's also hinting and suggesting quite strongly that the type of propaganda will be a kind of epistemological warfare on the psychology of the West in order to make it disbelieve anything in reality. In other words, to so blur the boundary between reality and fantasy that it's impossible for the West to make rational decisions. Now, that's a very interesting take, because I would submit to you that that epistemological warfare is already well underway. We see it, in my opinion, with all the wokery and trans propaganda and so on and so forth going on. And this is coming, for those of you who are aware of this is coming directly from the Frankfurt School of criticism, Theodor Adorno, Herbert Marcuse, and ultimately from the Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci, who argued that Marxism had to be cultural before it ever became political. So this is what I think the Russians now intend to capitalize on. And I do think there's a certain element here in play of perhaps capitalizing on long-term plants and programs that were started during the Soviet era. And now they're picking up these programs because really they have no other choice. So watch for that increase. Now, there's a second article I want to talk about in this respect that was shared. That previous article was shared by VT, this one by LGLR, and it's about Russia's brazen and intensifying sabotage campaign across Europe. And I want to read 4 paragraphs from this short article. The 2 at the beginning I want you to pay attention to because they confirm readings of certain events that I blogged about on this website and talked about in these news and views. So here we go. Quote, Russia is conducting a sabotage campaign across Europe in an increasingly aggressive effort by President Vladimir Putin to undermine Western support for the Ukraine, seeking to damage railways, military bases, and other sites used to supply arms to Kiev, U.S. and European officials say. The attempted sabotage, listen carefully folks, includes an alleged Russian-backed arson attack on a Ukrainian-linked warehouse in the United Kingdom. Remember, that one was an ammunition manufacturing and storage dump in the United Kingdom that caught fire and burned, and the link to the Ukraine was known at the time. No one was willing at that time, other than me and a few others in the alternative media, were suspecting that the Russians may have had something to do with it. So this article is now telling you, yes, that was a Russian attack. Now, whether it was or not is beside the point. The perception now is being created that all these types of events have to be pinned on Russia. It could very easily be the West itself engaging in false flag operations, and the rhetoric coming out of Mr. Medvedev isn't helping matters. Okay, so in other words, whether or not this is intentional, the whole story plays to the idea of an epistemological warfare or assault on the Western culture, because you can't really figure out who's doing what to whom. Anyway, to continue. The attempted sabotage includes an alleged Russian-backed arson attack on a Ukrainian-linked warehouse in the United Kingdom, a plot to bomb or set fire to military bases in Germany. Guess whose bases those would be? Attempts to hack and disrupt Europe's railway signal network. That's a huge one, folks. And the jamming of GPS systems for civil aviation, according to European and British authorities. The signal trafficking, folks, is hugely important because that could really cripple European travel. Europe uses rail for a lot of passenger travel, and I have difficulty believing the Russians would directly attack and endanger the lives of passengers on their railways. But it also moves a lot of freight, as does the United States, by rail, and that would be a rather different matter for the Russians to hack into and disrupt that whole cargo transfer. Now, skipping a couple of paragraphs here in this article, quote, German officials announced this month that they had uncovered an elaborate hacking campaign by Russian military intelligence operatives that penetrated the email accounts of the country's Social Democratic Party headquarters, the leading party in the country's governing coalition. So, in other words, the attack appears to be designed to begin to fracture that coalition. And perhaps that's being done in an effort to bring in a new government that would be far friendlier towards Russia. And we just saw the result, folks, of the European Parliament elections, which were a disaster. There's no other way of putting it. A disaster for the policies and politics of Mr. Globaloney. So if those can be translated now into the national elections in France and Germany and so on, you might see governments far friendlier to Russia and far less willing to go along with the dictates coming out of Swampington, D.C. So that's hugely significant. Beyond Germany, Russia has staged thousands of cyber attacks on Czech and European railways, including hacking into signals and ticketing services, according to a Czech official. The Financial Times first reported the attacks and the wider sabotage threat. So there you have it. The conclusion to draw from this, I think, is that the horizontal escalation is already well underway. And what the Russians are really doing is just reminding people of just how creative they can be in making life miserable, and this long before things escalate to any sort of hot conventional war, much less the use of nuclear weapons. So again, I'm going back to what I've said originally. Russia has all sorts of ways that they can complicate life in the West, and they are demonstrating and showing the willingness to do so until we come to our senses. Now, there's another story out there to shift gears that I do want to talk about, because this is the recent expiration of the petrodollar agreement between Saudi Arabia and the United States, that Saudi Arabia would sell oil and price it only in American dollars. This was the basis for sustaining the United States dollar reserve currency status after the collapse of the gold standard and Nixon taking us off the Bretton Woods arrangement in 1972. So this is the central agreement behind the reserve currency status of the American dollar. So I want to read a few short paragraphs from this article and let these statements sink in, and then I'll give you a little bit of speculation as to what I think we can look forward to at this juncture. Saudi Arabia has decided not to renew its 80-year petrodollar deal with the United States, which expired on Sunday, June 9th, as per media reports. This agreement, originally signed on June 8, 1974, had been a key part of U.S. global economic influence. By choosing not to extend this contract, Saudi Arabia can now sell oil and other goods using different currencies, such as the Chinese renminbi, euros, yen, and yuan, instead of only U.S. dollars. There's also talk of exploring digital currencies like Bitcoin for transactions. And let me stop there. That to me is a huge clue in that they intend the electronic component of financial transfer to be done either in cryptocurrency or in central bank digital currency. My bet is in the long run, they are going to opt for some currently existing central bank digital currency platform. And the reason why I think that is that when you scratch and sniff the whole BRICS Shanghai Cooperation Organization long enough, you come to discover that the geopolitical interests of the member partners in that alliance or that bloc are to some extent culturally and geopolitically contradictory. Plus, there is the elephant in the room that no one likes to talk about, and that's the Chinese Communist Party. No one trusts that government. There is a long history for why, and we don't need to rehearse it. But the bottom line is no one trusts that government, and therefore no one is going to trust any arrangement in which the Chinese central bank has a huge lion's share of the transaction going on. Not to mention the fact that you have other very large economies in that bloc, Russia, India, Japan, just for starters. So that's why I think we're a ways off from a BRICS central bank digital currency. But I do think that they would be more than willing to work out some sort of arrangement of a cryptocurrency or a basket of cryptocurrencies as their electronic component of financial clearing. The other part of this is I do not expect that you will see any of those countries, especially countries like India or Japan, ever move to the idea of going completely cashless. I don't think that's in the cards. Anyway, to continue. The decision marks a significant move away from the petrodollar system established in 1972 when the U.S. stopped linking its currency directly to gold. It's expected to accelerate the global trend of using currencies other than the U.S. dollar in international trade. End quote. And with that, I absolutely agree, and this is the biggest component of my speculation on what all of this means. I do not think that it means overnight that the U.S. dollar loses its reserve currency status. I think that it will continue to be a part of the holdings of central banks around the world. So in other words, while it may not lose its reserve currency status, it will not maintain a monopoly on that status. In other words, what we are entering into, I think, is a period where you may have more than one reserve currency. Now, that system, in fact, we've been under before because, of course, after World War I, the reserve currency status largely was the American dollar and the British pound sterling. So this has been a system that's occurred before, usually a kind of duopoly system as one transition from one reserve currency to another. What I'm suggesting is different this time, is you might find the emergence of several regional reserve currencies, and I do think that we see signs of this emerging already. We've had that strange deal between Japan and India for logistical support for each other that I speculated was going to be cleared. The financial clearing in that agreement was probably in a secret protocol, and that it would be settled in Japanese yen and Indian rupees. So in other words, I think we're watching the emergence, the first steps in regional reserve currencies, and incidentally, I do think the actions of several American states in establishing legal definitions of money in terms of specie, removing sales tax on bullion, establishing state bullion depositories, and so on, is in part a component of this move towards the possibility of regional reserve currencies for clearing. In the case of the American states, this may evolve into domestic compacts internally to the United States, and those in turn might lead to some sort of regional arrangement between whatever body represents those regional arrangements with those states and foreign governments. So who knows? We're in a situation of flux right now. Saudi Arabia has just signaled it officially. So hang on, folks. I think the next 3 to 5 years are going to be really interesting to watch in terms of the financial system that is going to be built out, if any is going to be built out. And I do suspect that will be the case. And I also strongly suspect that even though they might push for central bank digital currency, that this is not going to happen anytime soon, that there's not going to be a worldwide displacement of actual cash. Anyway, time will tell, of course, if that guess is correct or not. Anyway, that will do it. Don't forget to get your questions and comments in no later than 10 o'clock U.S. Central Time this evening. Tomorrow, the vid chat. Hooray, we've had an entire week without any rain or severe weather. And they're not anticipating any, so we are due for our 5 o'clock evening vid chat tomorrow night, 5 o'clock U.S. Central Time. We'll see you, folks. Bye-bye. God bless, and we'll see you on the flip side.